Believe it or not, when Lyft and UberX first launched, drivers were paid on a commission basis, and we got 80% of the fare, and Uber and Lyft took 20% of the fare. So how did we get to a point where on some of these fares, drivers are getting such a low percentage? So I personally became a rideshare driver back in 2014, almost 10 years ago now. And back then, we were paid on a commission basis. We received 80% of the fare, and Uber or Lyft took 20% of the fare. Those fares were calculated on elevated per mile and permanent rates, and after every single ride, drivers got 80% of it. These fares were a lot better than they are nowadays. And passengers, when they requested these rides, saw a range of what they could possibly pay. And what they paid was calculated after the ride, depending upon what route the driver took and how long it took. So passengers did not know exactly what they were going to pay when they requested a ride. And Uber especially has always catered towards the passenger. They've always wanted to make it as easy as possible for the passenger. Believe it or not, many years ago, Uber didn't even allow tipping. They told us not to even accept cash tips. So to make it easier for passengers, they introduced upfront pricing. This is where they calculated the fare on the passenger side upfront, and in turn, they introduced per mile and permanent rates for drivers. So we were no longer paid an 80% commission, it was changed to a per mile and permanent rate for every mile and minute that we drove on trip. So what a passenger was paying and what a driver was getting paid could be completely divorced sometimes. Uber could charge the passenger X amount and pay the driver X amount, and Uber could take a much higher commission on certain rides where in the past, commission rates were set strictly at 80-20. Alright, so upfront pricing for passengers and per mile permanent rates for drivers existed for a few years. And then the fight came for drivers for independent contractor status. And this fight originated in California, where drivers were basically saying, you're classifying us as independent contractors, but you don't treat us like independent contractors. You don't tell us where we're going up front, we don't know the destination, and we also don't know what we're going to get paid. So in turn, Uber introduced upfront fares for drivers, where they calculate the fare for the driver upfront. This had not happened previously when they were calculating the upfront pricing for passengers. So in the majority of the country, drivers are no longer paid on a per mile permanent basis. They see the fare, they see the upfront fare on the request screen when they receive a request, and they accept rides based on those upfront fares. And this again is a way for Uber and Lyft to manipulate the fare in their favor. Yes, they give us upfront information now. We know the pickup location obviously, and we also know the drop-off location. We know the duration and distance to the drop-off location. But the fare is also being calculated upfront as well. This allows them to manipulate the fare. This also allows them to manipulate each driver's upfront fares. And we've been covering on the channel a lot lately where Uber and Lyft have been shaving on those upfront fares. Overall transparency has just completely gone out the window. Now, where do we go from here? In my opinion, the upfront fare calculation for drivers, that needs to go away. The fare being calculated upfront on the request screen needs to go away. Drivers should be paid on the actual per mile and permanent basis that they're driving. And the rates also need to go up. They have been going down for drivers since I began driving back in 2014. This is ridiculous. Instead of getting a raise and adjusting for inflation over time, drivers are getting paid less and less. And the model that should be implemented nationwide is the one that is in Washington State and Seattle. They're given all the information up front, but the fare is not calculated up front. They're paid on actual per mile and permanent rates, and those rates are elevated compared to the rest of the country. And here in Minnesota, we could be the next shoe to drop. We're implementing a similar strategy that they used in Washington State. I hope it passes here in Minnesota because that could open the floodgates for other states and go nationwide. And drivers should be paid for our actual output, the mileage and time that we're driving, and our rates should also be elevated. And yes, both Uber and Lyft will have to adjust the pricing on the passenger side. Prices will go up for them. They're going to have to foot this bill. But in my opinion, per mile and permanent rates need to be implemented again. They need to be elevated. Just get rid of bonuses altogether and just elevate the per mile and permanent rates. Do that. It's simple. But what do all of you think? Do you know that it was a commission basis way back when both of these companies launched and drivers got 80% of the fare? Leave a comment below and let us know. Thanks again for watching and drive safe. Thanks.